is a Nightline Friday night special.
The scandal will forever be part of Bill Clinton's legacy.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
A navy blue dress. What did Ms. Lewinsky say?
Let's deal with the facts.
It's nobody's business.
What Mr. Clinton did to me was wrong.
I have sinned.
It is immoral.
They are about to impeach our president.
We have an excellent case.
And when you hear somebody say, this is not about sex, it's about sex.
The respondent, William Jefferson Clinton, President of the United States, is not guilty as charged.
On his last day in office, for the president and the country, there is closure.
I've accepted a 5-year suspension of my law license.
This matter is now concluded.
Tonight, the deal. An imperfect ending to an embattled presidency.
From ABC News, this is Nightline. Reporting tonight from the White House, Ted Koppel.
No one's been talking about it much these last few days, what with the new folks coming into town, preparing to move in and take over. The people who have been living and working here have been doing a lot of reminiscing, mostly about the good times and what they've accomplished. They've been packing up and moving out and preparing for the next phase of their lives, whatever that will be. So they haven't been focusing a lot on the possibility that the president might be indicted after he leaves office and that he might have to stand trial on criminal charges, or at least so we thought. It turns out, however, that the president and his lawyers have been thinking about that a lot these last few weeks. They have, in fact, been negotiating a deal that seemed to come out of nowhere this afternoon. On this last full day of his presidency, Bill Clinton signed a document called an Agreed Order of Discipline, in which he acknowledges that, quote, he knowingly gave evasive and misleading answers in violation of a judge's discovery orders concerning his relationship with Monica Lewinsky. By signing that agreement and by accepting a 5-year suspension from the Arkansas bar and by agreeing to pay a $25,000 fine, the president no longer has to worry about being indicted. The independent counsel has agreed not to do that. Not perhaps the way that Bill Clinton wanted his last full day here at the White House to be remembered, but a big worry about his future has now been eliminated. Here's more from Nightline correspondent Chris Bury.
Even as the moving van waited outside 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, even as the president packed up the Oval Office, even as he made one more trip to the White House mess and hugged his staff in a final round of goodbyes, even in his very last moments on the job, as captured in these photographs by the New York Times, Bill Clinton's lawyers were busy cutting a deal. And the melodrama that has so marked the Clinton presidency produced one final surprise.
Today's announcement, I'll have for you shortly, brings complete closure to both the Office of the Independent Counsel investigation and the Arkansas Bar Committee case without indictment or disbarment.
The White House spokesman struggled to put the best face on an acknowledgement from the president that stops short of admitting perjury.
He's acknowledged in the past that he gave statements that were false and misleading, and he wants to put that behind him now.
Instead, Bill Clinton admits for the first time that he knowingly gave evasive and misleading statements under oath. The press secretary read his statement.
In this consent order, I acknowledge having knowingly violated Judge Wright's discovery orders in my deposition. In that case, I tried to walk a fine line between acting lawfully and testifying falsely, but I now recognize that I did not fully accomplish this goal and that certain of my responses to questions about Ms. Lewinsky were false.
It was left to David Kendall, the president's lawyer, to emphasize what Bill Clinton does not acknowledge in this agreement.
He did not lie. We have not admitted he lied, and he does not do so today.
The president does not admit that he lied. Why is that such an important distinction?
If you admit you lied, you're saying, I committed perjury, except for possibly arguing it wasn't a very important statement. But it still looks like perjury. If you say I was evasive, I was misleading, and I was wrong, then you're admitting that you violated rules, but you're saying I didn't commit a crime.
The president's lawyer, David Kendall, and the independent counsel, Robert Ray, had been negotiating for the last month. As part of the deal, Bill Clinton surrenders his Arkansas law license for 5 years, pays a $25,000 fine, and agrees not to seek the reimbursement of attorney's fees. In return, the independent counsel spares Mr. Clinton the embarrassment of an indictment and possible criminal trial after he leaves office, and spares himself the prospect of losing that trial in the overwhelmingly Democratic District of Columbia.
I promised the American people that I would complete this investigation promptly and responsibly. Today, I fulfill that promise. The nation's interests have been served, and therefore, I decline prosecution.
The president's acknowledgement covers only the answers he gave under oath in his Paula Jones deposition.
At any time were you and Monica Lewinsky alone in the hallway between the Oval Office and this kitchen area?
I don't believe so, unless we were walking back to the back dining room with the pizza. I don't.
Clinton paid a $90,000 fine after the judge in that case found he had given, quote, false, misleading, and evasive answers designed to obstruct the judicial process. This after the president had also paid Jones $850,000 in a settlement.
I do.
In his consent agreement, the president does not admit to misleading Kenneth Starr and his deputies during the Lewinsky grand jury investigation.
The president believes that that testimony was in no way evasive, misleading, or false.
Secret Service people were told something to this effect: this event never happened. Let's just pretend this event did not happen. Do you have knowledge of it or not?
No, sir. And I didn't instruct the Secret Service in that regard.
As a prosecutor who questioned the president, you are convinced that he lied before the grand jury?
Absolutely, without question.
At least one of Kenneth Starr's deputies who questioned the president that day regrets that today's agreement does not force Bill Clinton to at least acknowledge the nature of his testimony to the grand jury.
I'm disappointed, but certainly not surprised. But you have to remember, there's no legal difference whatsoever between admitting to the Arkansas bar that you obstructed the Paula Jones civil rights lawsuit versus obstructing our criminal investigation.
If you focus on the grand jury, you're looking at one of the most serious institutions we have. And if he had admitted misleading the grand jury, he would have admitted that he essentially misled them in what was publicly televised testimony. And I don't think he wanted to say that.
Here in Washington, today's announcement produced a collective sigh of relief. In Congress, Republicans and Democrats no longer have to fear the repercussions of a Clinton indictment. And soon-to-be President Bush now avoids the messy politics of a pardon. But for Bill Clinton, of course, this last day on the job amounted to one final tarnish on a legacy he has lately tried so hard to polish. This is Chris Bury for Nightline in Washington.
When we come back, conversations I recorded earlier this evening with independent counsel Robert Ray and White House Chief of Staff John Podesta.
This is ABC News Nightline, brought to you by Go.com.
I'm joined by independent counsel Robert Ray, who replaced Kenneth Starr roughly 15 months ago, October 1999. This deal, this arrangement with David Kendall, actually with the president, but you negotiated it with David Kendall. What is it that you agreed upon?
Well, we agreed upon a number of things. First, that there needed to be a full acknowledgement of responsibility, an accounting, if you will. That took the form of a recognition and admission by the president that he gave knowingly evasive and misleading testimony in his answers in the Jones case. Second, that an appropriate administrative sanction be imposed, which was imposed by the Arkansas bar, a 5-year suspension of his law license. Third, that restitution in the sense was imposed, $25,000 in the form of a fine. Moreover, that the President agreed that he would not seek fees under the independent counsel statute that he might otherwise have been entitled to.
Is that potentially a lot of money that we're talking about?
Potentially. Legal fees are a lot of money.
It's interesting to listen to you and to listen to the President's lawyer, David Kendall, because whereas you said that he knowingly gave misleading and
evasive
answers. Mr. Kendall picks up on the evasive and misleading, but somehow leaves out the knowingly. That seems to me to be a rather key word.
Well, it's not only a key word, but it's the word that the President used by signing the agreed order imposing discipline.
Let me read you something from a letter which, in fact, your office has released. It's a letter from David Kendall to you. I've highlighted one paragraph here. Let me just take a moment to read it to you. As we've discussed, the President described to the grand jury on August 17, 1998, what he had attempted to do in his deposition. He stated that when he was deposed, quote, I was doing my best, and Mr. Kendall has underlined that, I was doing my best to be truthful. I wanted to be legal without being particularly helpful. My goal in this deposition was to be truthful. I did not wish to do the work of the Jones lawyers. I was determined to walk through the minefield of this deposition without violating the law, and I believe I did. How can Mr. Kendall claim that that is still true if the President now acknowledges that he knowingly misled?
Well, the agreed order includes two components, knowingly misled, knowingly evasive and misleading testimony, prejudicial to the administration of justice, which is also an important component of what the President acknowledged, a full acknowledgement in my judgment. But in addition, the President also acknowledges that he fell short of that line, that he fell short of his efforts to walk that careful line, and that indeed his testimony with regard to Ms. Lewinsky was in part false.
But Mr. Kendall's letter to you doesn't go that far. It allows people a few days from now, a few weeks from now, a few months from now, to come away saying, well, there are sort of two different views of what the President really did acknowledge. Should there be any doubt about that?
No, there shouldn't be any doubt about that. As I said previously, the parties were in substantial agreement as to what was required in order to resolve this matter in a call, the exercise of my discretion, not to prosecute because it was in the country's best interest to do so.
Does all of this, in the final analysis, amount to the President having admitted that he broke the law?
I didn't ask the President to admit that he broke the law. This is not a plea agreement. I'm in agreement with Mr. Kendall with regard to that. What it required was a full acknowledgement of responsibility for the conduct.
Have a little bit of compassion for ordinary folks like me who are not lawyers and who just want to say, so I walk away from all of this believing that the President has done what? Did he do anything wrong? Did he break a law?
The President has acknowledged that he's done something wrong.
But it doesn't rise to the level, or you don't require that it be nailed down as rising to the level of having broken the law.
Well, as I spoke, I think, to the issue today, and it's contained as part of my press release, sometimes we may rely too much on law and Constitution and statutes, and perhaps the better judgment with some degree of sophistication and a recognition that life is not so simple. The country will come to accept the fact that this is an appropriate resolution in the best interest of the country and consistent with the principles of justice. I think that's what's been achieved today, and that's an important achievement, and one, I think, consistent with, hopefully, ultimately a recognition that federal law enforcement can get it right under very difficult circumstances, and the country's faith and confidence in the ability of investigations of high-level government officials can reach an appropriate resolution that is in the best interest of the country and consistent with the rule of law.
Mr. Ray, thanks very much indeed. I appreciate you coming in.
Thank you for having me.
When we come back, an interview I recorded earlier this evening at the White House with the President's Chief of Staff, John Podesta. in the Roosevelt Room of the White House with the President's Chief of Staff, John Podesta. I must confess I didn't think I'd be sitting here with you at 9:15 on the last day of your administration, but surprises happen. How long have you known? How long has this been in the making?
Well, the President's Counsel, David Kendall, has been talking to Mr. Ray over the course of the last probably couple of weeks, I guess. As you know, Mr. Ray had said that he wanted to, if he could, to settle this matter before the next administration took office, and I think he was, you know, he had a great desire to try to do that.
How would you characterize this agreement, this arrangement?
Well, the President, I think, wanted to put behind him this matter. He wanted to get on with his life, and I think that the agreement fundamentally is as follows, which is that he was not disbarred. He did take a suspension of his license in Arkansas. He didn't, this is not a plea bargain. He didn't plead guilty to anything. He said largely what he's been saying all along, but what I think was really in his mind and what was in his heart really was that he wanted to get this behind him, put it behind him, go on with his life, and that's, I think this accomplished that.
Tell me what you think he said. What is the essence of what he has admitted?
He said that in the Jones deposition, not in his grand jury testimony, I think that's an important point, in the Jones deposition, that he was evasive, that he did not want to give the people on the other side who he viewed as being engaged in a politically motivated lawsuit any ammunition. He didn't. He had this embarrassing fact situation that he was being evasive about, and that he has said that actually in the past. And he said today that, looking back on that, there were some statements in that testimony, in that deposition testimony, that were false. I think that what he was specifically referring to was he did testify in that case that he had not been alone in the Oval Office and in the environs of the Oval Office with Ms. Lewinsky.
Let me tell you where I still see the possibility of a little bit of conflict. Mr. Kendall, in his letter to Mr. Ray, and I realize this is not part of the agreement, speaks, and I won't read the whole thing because I did read it for Mr. Ray. He quotes the President as having told the grand jury that I was determined to walk through the minefield of this deposition without violating the law, and I believe I did. How can you say that at the same time that the President has signed a statement saying that he knowingly gave evasive and misleading answers in violation of the judge's ruling?
Well, that doesn't violate the law. What he said was...
To knowingly give evasive answers when you're under oath?
What he said was that he knowingly gave evasive answers in violation of the judge's discovery orders. That's right. Not a matter that's a matter of criminal law. That he's obviously paid a price for, but that didn't violate any federal statute. There was no perjury involved. But you know, what he really wanted to do was not do what we're sitting here tonight doing, and he didn't want to spend the next weeks, months, or more doing exactly that kind of hair splitting. He wanted to put it behind him and move on, and that's what he did. He admitted that when he said that he was not alone with Ms. Lewinsky again in the environs of the Oval Office, that was not a true statement when he went back and looked at it. But you know, he did not plead to any crime, and I don't think he committed any crime, and I don't think he thinks he committed any crime. He certainly didn't intentionally testify falsely. He tried to be evasive, as he said.
When you say he, and again, I am going to hair split here with you. When you say he didn't deliberately testify falsely, if he knowingly misled, I mean, I have a fairly good command of the English language. If you knowingly mislead me...
We can go around this tree. You know, we've been doing it for years. I think the American people kind of lost interest in it long ago. I think what he said was that he was trying to walk a fine line. And in these couple of cases, he may have walked over it.
I gather that even as you and I sit here a few feet from here in the Oval Office, the President's still at work.
Yeah, he still is.
It's 9:30.
Now, I think when we said that we were going to work till the last hour of the last day, we didn't quite have this in mind, but that's where we are.
I know you're not yet ready to give any details, but can you at least give me the subject matter on what we're likely to get, possibly even before this night is over?
Well, I think that, as you know, he's been he's had a number of pardon requests in front of him. They're a broad range of people and individuals, most of whom no one's ever heard of, and he's looking at those and trying to make a final decision about them.
His capacity to compartmentalize is fabled. Is this behind him already, or are you and I the only ones talking about it here in the White House anymore?
Oh, I think it's behind him. I think that I think the American people really came to respect the fact that during all this controversy, he came to the Oval Office, every day, working for them. And I think he's really thinking about what he's going to do in the future. He's talked about getting his library up and going. He wants to start a foundation. He wants to work on issues of racial reconciliation, world peace.
Well, Mr. Podesta, no one can accuse you of not working until the last moment, and I thank you for taking time out to talk to me.
Thanks, Ted.
I'll be back with a closing comment or two in a moment. Tomorrow, George W. Bush will reclaim the house his parents once lived in. But tonight, it is still the Clintons' home. And on this, his last day in office, the president made it clear that he can still dominate the headlines. ABC News coverage of the inauguration begins at 7 a.m. Eastern with a special edition of Good Morning America. Peter Jennings will continue through the day with complete coverage of all the day's events. And that's our report for tonight. I'm Ted Koppel at the White House. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.
To receive a daily email about each evening's Nightline and a preview of special broadcasts, log on to our webpage at nightline.abcnews.com.
This has been a presentation of ABC News. More Americans get their news from ABC News than from any other source.